Hey everybody, welcome back to the Dr. Denisha Keating Show. I have two special guests on today, Hannah and Harper. Harper is joining me as my co-host today. Now remember, we are doing our kitchen table conversation where we are coming together as two friends to sit with each other and talk through something as friends, and we're going to ask questions to understand the other person. The two rules are we can't yell, scream, and then we'll add a third rule. We don't want to talk over each other, but we're inviting you as that fly on the wall to be the person who hears how we navigate a conversation like this. So, Hannah, go ahead and take it away. Let's hear who you are, what do you do, and let's jump in.
Excellent. Well, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me today. My name is Hannah Rowan Fry. I'm a writer and preacher or speaker, depending on where you come from and what you feel about women in ministry. I'll take both titles. I know we can talk openly about stuff like that here. But I'm really passionate about spiritual formation and helping people really access the Bible in a simple, approachable way, not with fear, but with reverence, of course, but really being able to embrace who Jesus made them to be in approachable ways, and not just for your faith, but for your life, for everything about your life.
I love that. So, we want to talk about the Sabbath and what does that mean for
Yes.
you, for me? What is rest? Why is it important? So, let's just jump into what that is. What does it mean when you say Sabbath?
This is such a good question because Sabbath is really one of those antiquated terms, and it's really not even considered a Christian term. It's more of a Jewish term, but traditionally it's a 24-hour period of rest. And like originally, it means rest to the most dramatic degree, like no laundry, no watching TV, not even using electricity. Like it's extreme rest where you are not producing anything. And, today in a modern sense, it's really hard for us to really wrap our minds around what that could be because the examples we have in scripture are those very traditional ways. And let's be honest, it's impossible for us to not cook anything it's on a day. It's really hard, especially if you're raising kids or just have a busy life. It's really challenging to fully rest in those ways that we originally see it. So I love to describe Sabbath now still as a 24-hour period of rest, but not so much focused on what you're not doing, but really focused on your being. So you're not producing anything. You are just adding, the only value you're adding to the world that day is just yourself, not what you can create, not what you can figure out, not even bill paying or any of those kinds of things, but just very simply who you are, what you enjoy, and how you can spend time relationally with family, friends, just your being, not your producing.
I love that, and I know I was listening to her name's Bianca. She is a pretty big speaker in the Christian realm. Bianca, I always forget how to say her last name. Outlaw, but she or no Jurares. I always say it wrong, but she is amazing. She's a writer, a speaker, and she was like, I kept trying to like lay down on the Sabbath, take a full day off,
Mm-hmm.
and that didn't rejuvenate her. It didn't re-energize her. So what are some of the things that you do on the Sabbath that would be re-energizing to you?
I love that because there are people who are like, wait, Hannah, you're saying I just do nothing for a whole day? That sounds terrible. I'm like, no, 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 no. And really, it's so easy for us to think of Sabbath either as this legalistic sense, kind of like what I was describing earlier, or pendulum swing over to lazy. And there really is a beautiful area in between. And I will also say Sabbath just looks different for everyone. So I can give some examples and I will, but this is sort of how God made me. So it might be very different for people watching. So for me, I love to sleep in on my Sabbath, and that's not usually like all day, right? It's just maybe an hour extra or kind of lays in bed, lounge around for a little bit before I really get up and start my day. I love to read and journal. I love to do puzzles and go for a walk in nature. I live pretty close to the beach, so I love a beach walk. Any of those things. I love good food. I love going out to eat on my Sabbath and having just a really good meal out and about. Now, my husband, however, he's far more introverted than I am. So for his Sabbath, he also loves to sleep in, but he is happy closing the door, like closing the blinds, blocking off the entire world, and just watching really good movies. He loves like those really cinematic blockbusters. Like he's obsessed with Dune right now. It just came out on streaming, and so he's all about Dune too, you know. But he could watch that and just really enjoy someone else's creativity on his Sabbath. Maybe he would play a little guitar or something, but anything that he doesn't have to be responsible for the things of this world and just be responsible to the person God created him to be. That's what he likes. So it's interesting because of that, we typically Sabbath on separate days, which I know is also uncommon and doesn't really work for most families. But for us in our schedules right now, that's what's working. So it's neat to see sort of the way each of us schedule and structure a little bit different. That's best for us, which is really
Yeah.
different. Yeah.
And I think it's interesting because it like kind of makes sense too. Is like if you get re-energized by a walk, but he's like, I am gonna get physically tired from that. It's just
Yeah.
like that's okay to do differently as well, and then find something that you guys can do together. But I love that like he's like blinds closed, sleeping it away. For me, that's how like I can do for like a small period of time before I do start to see that I'm mentally getting hit. And I used
Mm.
to be like, I'm so lazy, but now it's like emotionally, mentally, like those are actually the worst things for me to do is to isolate and close the blinds.
Mm-hmm.
I feel depressed.
Yeah.
So I started to see like more like maybe watching one of my favorite movies or like just unplugging and turning my phone on silent, which feels so
Mm.
weird. I'm a business owner. So it's like, I'll
It's
just put it
kind
on
of
silent and be like,
scary.
I can last 4 hours. But it's more of like the reason the silencing of my phone has been such a good thing is that it keeps me from being distracted. I'll still check my phone. I'll still go in and check my emails every couple hours. But what I'm finding is that unplugness, I'm not rushing to the notification. And so
Mm.
that was really hard for me at first to get used to. Like I would panic. I'd be like, someone's. And my husband's like, you put it on silent. I was like, I know, but I'm afraid. And then he's like, okay, let's get you busy. So you're not like, okay, it's been 20 minutes.
Mm.
I have to do
Yes.
this the rest of the day. So what would you recommend starting off on if someone's never taken time off,
Mm-hmm.
never taken a rest day? First off, let's address the why is this important
Ooh.
that we do this?
Yes.
Because
Well,
I feel
why
like that
it's
needs to be addressed first.
yes. Well, and why it's important, I think it's kind of connected to what you're saying there because there is a vulnerability to it. But aside from the biblical command and promise, there in Hebrews it talks about Sabbath rest as being a promise of God, which is just so interesting. There's nothing else really physical. Most of the promises are kind of more conceptual, like love or eternal life, you know, all these things. But rest, like that's something we actually can control. So aside from the biblical prerogative that it's essentially commanded, it's just important for our rhythms, our faith rhythms. We see rhythms in every part of nature, whether that's seasons, whether that's flowers, bud break, planting, roots growing. There's even if you're in a climate that really has not much variation in temperature, you have the rainy season and the dry season, and different crops grow at different times of years. And so for us too, that's a very rhythmic kind of way to be who God made us and to embrace that image of God. Um, but also, it's really an act of trust. And I kind of think of it sometimes as like a tithe. You know, we talk about tithing 10% of our money, offering that to God. And especially in this economy, that's really hard for people to do. And what if we thought about our time as a tithe and our time as an offering? What would it look like for 10% of our week to really be set aside to trust God with? And that's what our offering is, right? It's an act of trust. And I
Yeah.
love that you use the example of
Mm.
4 hours because I think that's a great place to start. If you set a timer for 4 hours where you have your phone on do not disturb, where you're not doing any laundry or any dishes, you're not paying any bills, you're not mowing the lawn, you are just being you for 4 hours. and just see what that feels like, see what happens there, and embrace that kind of unknown, right? Of, is the world going to survive without me? Will my house survive without me? Will my business survive without me for 4 hours? And just kind of start and see. There's nothing to lose there, right? It's just a kind of a, let's try it and see what happens.
I love that. So it definitely, and I'm hearing two things in my head that I know someone who I know who's going to watch this, and they're
Mhm.
going to be like, I can't do that.
Ooh.
The first thing is sitting in silence is what I
Mm.
think my head goes to, and it's like I don't want to sit with my thoughts. And let me tell you, I just experienced that this earlier this week where I was telling my husband, like, I went to a conference and I spoke at this conference and I didn't have work to do, but I also didn't work out or like walk.
Mm.
And walking has been really healing for my body to like focus on. That's
Yeah.
how my mind stops racing. But I've always found that for me, when I sit in the silence, I start to get more anxious and I start to
Mm.
panic more. And so this week, I'm like, you know what? I can sit in this and I actually need to deal with it. But it
Mm.
didn't start that way 2, 3 years ago. During COVID, I lost my job. And so I think that's where the last time I sat silent was in COVID. And that was very scary for me. So I started to help my mental health by silencing my phone from 9 p.m. to 8 a.m. in the morning because like nobody really needs me at that point. It's all
Yeah.
spam emails anyway, but it was keeping me up at night that
Mm-hmm.
it was like every time my phone went off because it was the news and the chaos and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I need to stay plugged in." And it was like I need to silence it. So I silenced it when I was sleeping and started to sleep better. And I have
Wow.
not it's been 5 years. I have not taken that off my phone. Like my do not disturb starts at 9 o'clock P9 p.m. and comes back on at 8 a.m. And there's times I've turned it off,
Sure.
but it has been so much easier that it just automatically sets on my phone. So I'm not reminding myself to set it. But I find that when it's been off, I get more panicky and I'm like,
Mm.
wow. And it's because I'm like not being able to turn that off. So
Yeah.
then I've started recently doing it during the day. First, it started because I was doing Zooms and podcasts, so I didn't want all these calls coming
Mm-hmm.
through. But then I would be like, I'm going to leave it on for just an hour because I need to decompress. But this whole week, like, I've been sitting in that, like, let your brain process your emotion and speak truth into that. And I think that's where some of us get really afraid of that rest because we're like, oh, that's when my mind starts going. And it's
Yeah.
like maybe this is why it's doing that is because we keep pushing it off. So I see you. I know who's going to listen to this and be like, I hate that you called me out, Denisha. Like, I love you. And because I love you, I wanted to first say, like, it's a very real feeling to have all of those thoughts and emotions come swarming in. But the second thing that comes into mind is, well, I don't have 4 hours. I
Mm.
can't do that.
Mm-hmm.
So what are some simple, like, maybe they can't silence their phone for 4 hours because they're kids, or maybe they're taking care of somebody who's sick, and they have to be on their phone all the time. What would be something that might be else that they can do for rejuvenation to have that Sabbath of where it's not go 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 go? What are some other things that maybe they can try?
Well, I would definitely say when it comes to any of these kinds of ideas, it is not all or nothing. So if someone can't fully put their phone on do not disturb for 4 hours, then just turn off all your notifications except for calls and texts. Because especially if you are caring for someone, you are responsible for them. But like you're saying, you
Yeah,
don't need those email
you cannot. Yeah, I
notifications.
missed that call.
Right. You don't need that Facebook notification.
Most of
You
them
don't
are
need that
spam,
news.
guys.
You don't need that news article popping up. Like there's so much that gets directed straight to our phones that we really don't need. So even if it's not a full on do not disturb, just turn off everything but phone calls and text messages. And already it's going to feel lighter and more peaceful. Um, I also want to speak to
More
the
anxiety
silence.
first and then more peaceful.
Yes,
Because
yes.
I'm like, yeah, I see you. I see you.
It's true. Yes. I also want to speak to the silence part for a minute because you're right. It is scary to sit in silence. It is vulnerable and scary to be alone with your thoughts because our thoughts typically don't they're not in our benefit most of the time. We have to really direct them for them to be positive. But it is kind of one of those, like, it gets worse before it gets better sort of things. And any sort of personal or professional growth only comes through those moments of discomfort. So even like when I teach silence as a spiritual practice, we start with 2 minutes and we do it in the room together. So you've got 10, 20 people sitting in a room, and I set a timer on my phone. We're going to be silent for 2 minutes, and we're just going to focus on whatever you want to focus on. Maybe you're just going to, you know, say a short prayer. Maybe you're going to just try to hear God's voice and focus back onto Him. Maybe, whatever it may be. And for 2 minutes, it is such a transformation from that first 10, 20 seconds where you're like, this is so weird. We're in a room together, but no one's talking and there's no music playing. Like, we can hear the building creak or the rain or whatever, but otherwise nothing. So the person next to me coughed, or, like, you can hear all these little things. And then by the end of these 2 minutes, it is so peaceful. And there is this just unique experience of a room of people in such a short amount of time, going from uncomfortable to like in community, feeling God's peace, and just like everyone's shoulders relax, and so I would even start
I
small
love
with
that.
that too. Like, go to what woman, and probably men also, but I can speak for women, um name a woman who has never sat in her car 2 minutes longer when she gets to her destination, just to have that moment of no one's touching her, no one's needing her.
That deep breath, like just like
Yes.
a, yeah.
Yes, and
So
we
one
can
of the
manufacture
wild
that at
things,
any time in our lives. Like, those are the things we really have
right?
control over, and we just have to remember that it doesn't have
Yes.
to be all or nothing. There's so much in between.
It's so true. And it's like one of the wild things that I learned a couple years ago through Jenny Allen's book, Get Out of Your Head, was that we
Mm.
have 60,000 thoughts a day. 75% of them are repetitive. I was like, so if you're like, why am I so anxious? And probably because 75% of your thoughts are actually repeating over and over and over and over again. So
Yes.
this is where I really have loved her book. I literally have read it like every 6 months for the first 4 years. And then I was like, I think I might need to go to a therapist and talk this out, because reading it every 6 months, like Jenny Allen, like I love her so much because it's just such a good reminder. And I haven't had to read it in over a year, but I was like, I want to read it again
Mm.
because I think I could get so much more that I missed beforehand because I was just trying to captivate that thought. But I think um, there was this moment this week that I actually was like, oh my God, I'm going to have to read her book again. And I was like, no, no, no. I get to read her book again. This is a
Yeah.
good thing because what this means is now it's a deeper level of like my thought process is that I'm able to sit in this awkward silence with myself and it not feel very good. Versus years ago, it was like, just get through the thought, just don't think about it, just distract yourself. But now I'm like, I want to sit with this and speak truth to this thought,
Yeah.
which is what a Sabbath does, is that it makes us physically rest from the work. Like we can go and have fun, do a family day, go to the beach. And I love that that's what Bianca had shared was like for her, she finds it more energy to her soul by hiking, going to the beach, reading a book, sitting there, not just laying there. And I think that's really when I hear Sabbath, I'm like, to do what? Like we still have to cook and clean. Like we don't have to clean. We really, if we want to do that, if that's something that actually gives back, like me putting
Hmm.
things in organizing them, that's okay. That's not, you're not sinning because you cleaned your house, but it's like that's really what I got to a point of telling myself. Like,
Wow.
oh, I'm sinning me like that. Obviously, I'm not honoring the Sabbath, and that was because someone told me that, and I was like, oh my God, I'm just trying to like get my mind straight. And so now I'm at, I think, at a level where I'm like, oh, okay, one of my Sabbaths, what I do kind of, I try to do on Mondays because weekends tend to
Mm.
be a little bit busier. But Monday morning is there's no calls, no meetings on Mondays, and I try to take Mondays slower be in
Yeah.
the morning because I get to hang out with my daughter. But it is that thing where it's like, let me just slow down my day a little bit. I follow another person. Her name is Blake, and she has a podcast that used to be called Crappy Christian Podcast, and I really love that. But now it's shifted to a new name because it's been a while, and I forget what the new name is. But she has shared like go outside and touch grass, and or
Mm.
like slow down your thinking by when you wake up, instead of being like, let me read my Bible, let me do this, let me do that, let me get away from the to-dos and just say, God, enter in my mind before I do.
Mm.
And so I have been
Yeah.
every day this week, I'm like, God, I just want you to enter in my mind, because my thoughts are not very nice. My 60,000 thoughts that are rapid fire. And according to psychology today, which was so wild, is they said you could have two thoughts at the same time. And I was like, bet. I had like, there was a few times this week that I was like, there are 10 different things in my head. There's a whole committee yelling at me. And I was like, what is happening? And that's where I started to like, okay, what are my tools? It's okay. You want to ask a question? What question would you like to ask? Here, let me see. Whisper. Oh, okay. No. She asked, like, like she was just like, ask yourself, how are you slowing down? And I
Yeah.
think that a real Sabbath day is so foreign in America for us,
Yes.
that if this is why I think it feels so, it's like we don't have time for that. What is the downside to not finding rest in your own experience?
Oh, like where do I start? I
The
think for
somewhere,
one,
all of the
yes,
places. We're
right,
like,
all the
here's the
places.
60,000 thoughts.
I will say, just at a very basic level, I am a much better person when I'm resting regularly. I am, like, honestly, I'm just not a good person if I am not taking care of
Same
myself
girl.
in that way. Truly, just to call it out.
Yeah, yeah.
But like, I even think about relationally, like I mentioned, my
Mm,
husband likes to have his Sabbath really isolated. And for me, I like to go out to dinner or maybe
mhm,
have a date. And there's something about
mm.
knowing that I'm going to have like uninterrupted time with him on my Sabbath or at some point, that as things come up throughout the
Mm,
week and we're tired or busy or whatever, there's just this knowing of like, we've already got a time scheduled to talk through this. So I don't need to, force it now when I'm tired or when he's tired or
right,
distracted.
right.
Like I know that time is coming, and it allows me to get through my week even a little bit differently, knowing that I have
Mm,
something at the end that is going to be restful and rejuvenating, and not just relationally, I mean
yeah,
everything, but that's kind of a specific
yeah.
example that really helps keep in perspective. Like obviously my stress level is way down. um
Mm,
think about the way your body responds to those anxious thoughts. Even
yeah.
if you don't have them all the time, there is still a tightness and an uncomfortability. You lose sleep. And so being able to have a day where, like, I am going to give myself permission to not think about this work issue that's stressing me out, this family issue that's stressing me out. Today, it's about me and God, and to give yourself that
Mm,
permission, which we do again see in scripture. And I think that's the thing, is we often feel like it's selfish, especially if we have friends who are not Sabbath resting. But it is a part of scripture that's a beautiful invitation that we
yeah,
just have to accept. And
yeah,
I also, not have to accept, like we have to do it, we get to accept, right?
yeah.
But I also would like to point out, there's part of the conversation we haven't talked about yet, which is the seasonality of our lives. Sabbath is going to look very different for you if you live alone than if you live with a family. When you're raising small kids, than if you're an empty nester or raising teenagers. If you're married, if you're single, when it's this middle of sports season and you've got six
Mm,
kids you're carpooling around to six different ball games every single weekend, and in spring break when you just get to be home with them.
right,
And so there's
right.
a little bit of
There's
that
no rest
grace
during
too.
spring break.
No. Oh, absolutely not. And so there's a lot of these like things too, again, where we kind of have to go back to the in somewhere in between lazy and legalistic, and know that your Sabbath, you can get into a routine, but it might still look different week to week. It might be on a different day in the wintertime than in the summertime. It might be 4 hours in the summertime and then 24 hours in the wintertime. There's just a lot of seasonality to it, that I think we can't forget, because otherwise we go into it and we are going to fail. we feel like a
Yeah.
failure. We set ourselves up for failure. You look around and it's like, ugh, well, the dishes didn't get done this week. Well, Hannah said I'm not supposed to do the dishes on Sabbath. And so then it's like you go into your week then, and it's actually not provided any value to your
Right.
life. It's actually caused
Yeah.
more anxiety. So there really is just some
Mm.
creativity that you kind of get to play around and experience, like, maybe I'll try this, maybe I'll try this, see what happens.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think too, like when we look at the depression rates and how they've increased over the last 10 years, 15 years, we're like, why are we so anxious? But Hopkins medicine actually says that they had found 40% of adults with chronic pain that
Mm.
actually indicated depression and anxiety in their body. And it's like I kept going back and forth like, what was it that we got away from in our world, is that we in the US specifically, is that we've gotten away from community and we've gotten away
Yes.
from rest. And I think,
Yes.
what we're teaching our kids is go, 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 go. And it's like, and then we wonder why at 4, 5, 6, 8 years old, they're depressed or anxious or panicking and crying because they're just like, we're not meant to go like that.
Yeah.
And we're really not. And like that's why I love that God was like, on the seventh day he rested in Genesis. And I was like, what? Like the our God rested
Mm.
because he was just like, bro, like I'm teaching you. He didn't need rest. And that was something somebody explained to me. They're like, Denisha, do you really think that God needed rest? No. What was he doing? He was teaching us that
Mm.
we needed to rest. And that's what we are teaching. Like I'm trying to teach my daughter is like, we need the slow mornings. We
Yeah.
need those particular moments where we unplug and pull away. But what I didn't realize was what we do in America is we do it as vacation days. We're like,
Yes.
we have 2 weeks of PTO. So let's go 365 days a year. And then it's like, that's not feasible. We
And
have
that we
to
have to
have
earn it.
that one, yeah, and that we have to earn it. And
Mm-hmm.
versus like being able to say, no, like, with working out, it's been one of the things that like some people are like, you go 7 days a week, you go hard, you go 2 hours. It's like actually with the body, they actually say like you have to have a rest day from
Mm.
working out. And what do is you still move, but you stretch, you rest it. So that way, because
Mm.
your muscles can't keep going like that. And it's like I'm like, okay, but why do we do the same thing to our brain? Why do we do that? And it's so wild when you start to look at, because me, I'm like that person who's like 365, put my foot on the gas, and I don't even recognize that I haven't hung out with people in 3 weeks. I'm like, what is
Mm.
wrong with me? Why am I crying? Why am I snappy? And then I look at my calendar and I'm like, oh, I've been
Yes.
going for 3 weeks straight with just sleeping. And maybe those sleep hours were 4 hours. There are seasons of that, but we
Mm-hmm.
cannot live a life of that. And that's where
Right.
so many of us are experiencing depression, anxiety, mental fatigue, physical illnesses. That when the doctor is like, well, what's your routine? They're like, you need to do this and this. And we scoff, but it's like so important to step into that and say, you know what can I do today? Do I need to not do another thing and maybe take a day of just sleeping around? Like that might be what I need. But if we're not even like accurate sleep, that's a huge part
Mm-hmm.
of making sure that we're physically taking care of ourselves, because that could lead to all of the health issues that we have too. So it's so funny that we sometimes I'm like, oh, how do we do this? And I'm like, I'm doing some of those things already. But I'm like, ah, because in my brain, I literally still look at the word Sabbath. Like I see it
Yeah.
across and it's like lay down on the floor and don't move for 24 hours. And I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
it's so not
Yes.
okay. But I love that you were like something on the calendar that you get to look forward to, like a dinner, a
Yeah.
movie, going out. And it's kind of funny. I'll share this and then I'll let you go. Is I started laughing at myself because probably like 3 years ago, I told him, I texted a friend and I said, we desperately need to get out of the house and the lockdowns need to stop happening because I want to
Mm.
go to like a club and start dancing. I need to get out. And she was like, girl, I'm coming over. And I was like, what's wrong with me? And she's like, go step outside. And I was like, I
Yes.
don't like the club. The club is not for me. Like, I never liked I love dancing, but I never liked that
Sure.
scene. And she was like, "Oh, girl, like Jesus, come right now." And I was like, that I was so stir crazy. And that's what
Mm-hmm.
happens is then, some of us will lean into things that are not good because we're just
Yes.
rushing through our schedule. So you're like, you need to look at your schedule, figure out a day that you can do this, even if it's just that 10-15 minutes in your car where you're like, I'm going to hold off going inside. And I love that you said that because it's just like, that's a really simple thing to be like, let me sit for 5 extra minutes in my car when I get home and just breathe for a second. And
Yes.
I'm like, I can do that. Maybe I can't do a 24-hour turn like Sabbath. Maybe I
Mm-hmm.
can't do a 4 hour, but I can do a 5 minute even in the
Yeah.
bathroom. We're just like,
And not feel
so
bad about it. That's the key
yeah,
here. Not feel guilty about those 5 minutes in the car or those 5 minutes in the bathroom. And I
you know
love the
what?
example that you
Yes.
just shared because it speaks to our humanity too. Truly,
Yeah.
like think about that. After however long you were like, I am not myself anymore. So much so that I'm telling my friend we need to go to a club when that is not something I normally do. And
That's not, the club is
Sabbath
not for me.
and Sabbath is a reminder of who we are. It gets us back to that
Mm.
place where we can truly be ourselves again. And we're not making those kinds of phone calls that are like,
I feel
I don't
so
even know
silly
that.
sharing that though,
No, it's
because
so
I'm like,
good.
I only ever told her, and she was like, "Are you okay?" And I was like, "I hate the club, and I want to go. I need to get out." And I feel so silly, but it is because it's like what I recognize. When you're right, when I recognized with that is that when I wasn't taking the rest, I was leaning more toward food, and I was
Yeah.
struggling with my weight because I wasn't thinking. I was just like, I just want something to feel good
Yeah.
and nothing feels good. And like what you're saying is like the Sabbath is that's where we get to come back and be like, who am I? What do I enjoy? What do I actually like? So we don't make a Denisha decision to go to the club.
Well, and
It's very embarrassing.
I love it. Sabbath also, it's one of those unique things. Like typically when something's wrong in our lives and we're wanting it to be better, we look at what do we add? What medicine do I add? What workout do I add? What do I add? And
Mm-hmm.
Sabbath is the opposite. It's actually what do I
What
take
do I? Yeah.
away? What do I get
Mm.
rid of? And that's really foreign in our world too. Like there is nothing in our
Yes.
world that you can actually do less and be more. Like you are not going to get a promotion if you do less than your job description. You are not going to make more money if you do
That's
less.
true.
But that's the reversal of
But
the kingdom of God.
pause because doing all the more might not get
Mm-hmm.
you the promotion or the money either. So
Ooh,
it's
and what an
how do you
idea that
do
is.
well with what you
Mm,
have
yes.
versus I'm just doing all the things. And it's
Mm-hmm.
like we could have a whole topic on that.
It's so true. No,
Continue.
that's such a good point. Well, and I a friend told me this once about when Sabbath, in Genesis 1 when God rested, is he created humans on day 6 and then he rested on day 7. And when we read that and we think about our example, that means that we work and then we rest. That, the rest is a reward for those first 6 days. But it's actually opposite. That's how it was for God. But for humans, our first day was rest. So he made us, and then the first thing we did was rest. And so again, we didn't earn it. It came before anything else, and that is such a hard thing to wrap our
That's so
mind around.
foreign.
But it is
Yeah.
but it's such a beautiful picture of the gospel too, which we also can't
Yeah.
earn. We just receive the grace of God. And so it's like yeah, it's one of those mind-bending ways that God does things that we're like, "What? How does this
And
happen?"
it's so wild because in my one of the I'm doing like the 40-day Lent, one of
Mhm.
the ones in just the U Version Bible app. And one of the things that they were saying was like when Jesus healed the man on the Sabbath day, like the Pharisees were just like, "Oh, we're taking him out, like we're gonna kill him. That was not okay." And the whole point of that verse was like Jesus was like, there are moments that healing will need to happen, that rest will need to like things will need to
Yeah.
still go. But he's like, I'm not saying don't take care of yourself. I'm actually saying to
Mm,
take care of yourself.
yeah.
And I was just kind of like, that never heard it that way before because I always
Mm,
was like, well, people were like, well, that wasn't a very good decision. And I was like, but why did he go against the verse of like take the Sabbath? It was like he wasn't like go work because someone else I knew twisted that and they're like, even Jesus worked 7 days a week. It's totally
yeah.
fine. Like, come, if you got to do it, you got to do it. And it was like that was not the point. It was he was healing someone
Yes.
because it was like that was what was needed for that person to have the kingdom of heaven. So there are moments where it's like you're going to do that, but it is not an excuse to say, yeah, let me work 7 days a week. It was like that was needed for that man. Jesus
Yes.
knew that, but also it was that was Jesus. Y'all, we are not Jesus. But like he
Well,
even rested. He went off and rested. And I was like,
yes.
oh,
So
he
let's
did
talk
go
about that
rest.
for a minute because this is one of my biggest soapboxes right now because I work with church leaders a lot is that we and not just church leaders but Christians in general, we want to follow Jesus' example, right? That's the goal, is to be like Jesus, become like him, do what he did, be like Jesus. And what we do is we take that idea only to the feed the hungry, clothe the sick, love everybody kind of
Yep.
idea. But if we look at
Right.
we only see 3 years of Jesus' life truly in the Gospels. Like we don't see very much of it. And in those 3 years, there are 12 different passages of scripture where Jesus withdrew, where he said no, where he rested. And at least one of those times he went away for 40 days. 40 days and nights he withdrew. And so I think if we think we can
Yeah.
serve and love like Jesus did, but we aren't resting like Jesus did, when was the last time you took 40 days? I've never taken 40 days off other than a sabbatical. But if we see Jesus doing that at least once every 3 years, what a revolutionary
Right.
idea.
Right.
And how do we think we can
Right.
serve and love and carry burdens and hear other people and pray for them the way Jesus did if
Right.
we aren't also withdrawing, saying no? Like one of my favorite verses is when Jesus heals people from afar. There's the one, the woman of faith, and at first she asks him to heal her daughter. I think I'm getting this correctly, and he says no, and she
Yeah.
says please, like basically begs him, and so he does, but he doesn't go to her. So he still said no. He did eventually serve her, but it still was with a boundary. And I think about that. How can we bring in some of those saying no, some of those boundaries? There's Jesus did not answer most of the questions he was asked. And I think about myself.
He
I
always asked a
always want
question.
right. And I
Rude.
always think
Rude.
about like if someone asks me a question, I want to explain it to them. I want to be understood. Like that's my own pride and my own like sort of insecurity, that I want them to understand me and where I'm coming from. But then
Right.
I stay up at night thinking about, oh, and I forgot to say this, and I forgot to say this. And I wonder, what would some of those boundaries look like? That comfortability with saying
Right.
no, with withdrawing, all of those things that Jesus quite literally did.
And the crazy part is he withdrew to rest 12 times, but there were other times he withdrew when people would get angry and he's like, okay, I'm out. People wanted to
Yeah.
throw stones at him. That's the one I read yesterday. And I was like, and he's still with like, he left because he's like, they're not, the conversation is, there's no more conversation. He didn't
Right.
need to rationalize. He was just like, I gotta go. Like, and it wasn't, he was running away. It was just like, this is where it ends. This is
Yeah.
where the conversation is done. There is nothing going to happen that I haven't already said. And I think that's so crazy because I do the same thing. As I sit in turmoil sometimes where I'm like, oh, I didn't say that, I didn't say this, I
Yeah.
should have done this, I should have been more, I should have been better, I should have. And I'm like, look, I know that Jesus worried because he
Mm.
said that. I know that Jesus grieved. It literally, shortest verse in the Bible is Jesus wept. Like we
Yes.
know Jesus felt, but it is one of those things that we are focusing, I think, on perfection
Mm.
versus relationship. Like let's just have, like, we are going to make mistakes. That's why Jesus came. Like not because
Mm-hmm.
so we could make the mistake, but because we inherently we are going to be bad. Psychology actually tells us that is like we are
Yes.
inherently selfish people.
Mm.
And it's so funny. I heard someone recently, maybe like a year ago or 6 months ago, had shared like we are inherently good. I was like, I don't know where you got that because that is not true. Psychology actually says we are inherently selfish. We
Yeah.
think of only ourselves, not even our own family. Like we think first ourselves, then not. But we have learned to be like put yourself on the bottom of the totem pole. And I think in the church, it's like you have to be a server. But what we've done in a very toxic way is we've said, like, you can never ask for help. And it's like, that's pride as
Yes.
well as learned behavior. And that's not what the Bible teaches either, is that Jesus did step away because he was just like, time to rest. And that I
Mm-hmm.
think has been so surprising to so many Christians because they're like, wait, what? Like he did what? And it
Yeah.
was like, we kind of like skip over that. And we're like, here's the miracle. Here's where he was on 24/7. People were always following him instead of, and then he went off to rest and sleep and like eat. And I was like, what? Why do we skip over that? But we
Yes.
just do. I think it's natural to be like, yeah, 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 yeah. But I want to be like Jesus. And it's like, okay, but Jesus rested. He ate.
Right.
He had community. And people, we got to do that. We got to be in community. And I think that sometimes on my rest days, it's better for me to be around friends and talk and just not be a to-do list. I'm a very much of a
Mm-hmm.
to-do list person. So being able to just sit with someone for a couple hours and not do, even though my mind's still like I have 1,000 things to do, being forced present has
Yeah.
helped me be a little bit better.
I love that. Well, and like I think exactly what you're saying is true. We think of those scriptures that talk about sacrifice and self-sacrifice, and we take those to the most farthest degree. That is really not what God has asked us for. God did not ask us to sacrifice our lives for our own development. In fact, part of our development is learning to say no and to do those things that we see Jesus doing. Oh, I love that. This is such a good conversation. I'm really hoping
So
that people who are listening
I
are like
really am
sensing some
excited. I love
freedom
this.
because this is great. Ugh.
I hope so. I really do because it has been freeing for me just to have this conversation with you because it's not one that we often talk about. When we
Yeah.
usually talk about rest, we're like, "Oh, rest is really important and more of like mental health." But it's like, what about our spiritual health? Like that's
Yeah.
really where like I'm not even joking, the last 3 conversations I have had for the podcast have literally been mind, body, and spirit. And every
Oh.
single person I talked to have said, we've forgotten the spirit side. We have forgotten the spiritual side. We've forgotten the community side. And it's kind of like eye opening again, where I'm like, oh yeah, that's what I've forgotten. I'm key on my mental side where I'm like, okay, I can do this and do my checklist and do what works for me. I'm a type A personality, which kind of sucks. Sometimes I'm like, it's a little overwhelming, but physically it's like, okay, I know I need to work out, eat healthy, and
Yeah.
rest. But then when it comes to the spiritual side, the soul side of me, I'm like, I'll put that off. And I'm like, oh, that's the side of me that's feeling anxious and tension.
Mm.
Why? Because I'm not pouring into it. I'm
Yeah.
not giving rest to it. And so I like, even for me, like if this is for no one else, it's so selfish for me to be like, it's all for me. And I'm okay with that. But it is such a good reminder because I know so many other people are struggling with that as well. Is there anything else you would like to add before we end?
I would just really encourage people to truly just try it. And then if it feels weird, try it
Mm-hmm.
again the next week in a different way. And if it feels weird, try it again the next week in another different way, whether it's different time or different
Six
day or with different
months of
people.
trying. Yes.
Yes, yes. And like I love that how much of psychology that you've added to the conversation because when scripture and psychology are aligned, it's like we can't ignore that anymore. Right? Like when every aspect of when it's biblical scholarship and faith and the word of God, and then also literally science and research and development, when all of those are aligned on the same thing, it really gives us a reason, or it doesn't give us a reason to not pay attention anymore. Like we really at that point is like, okay, for one reason or another, we've got
Right.
to figure
Right.
this out and just see what a way forward with this idea looks like. And again, know that it will be different in different seasons of your life, not just like winter, spring, summer, fall, but when you're 18 versus when you're 25 versus when you're 60 versus when you're raising little kids,
Right.
all of
Right.
those things. And just try it and see. And again, if you lose anything, well, you won't really lose anything. I guess that's the moral of the story.
Right. Right. Well, and it's wild to me because I've listened to a lot of Christian speakers as well as people. Like you have to be very careful with what you put yourself into. But a
Yeah.
lot of people are like, oh, meditation, silencing your time, sitting still, resting, and all of these things where it's like prayer, meditation, and spending time with God are what they're recommending, but they're putting it in different things, you know. And it's kind of
Mm.
interesting that you see people who are really, really, truly giving themselves to Christ, and they're doing the mind, body, and spirit with Christ. The anxiety, the depression, the sleepless nights, the fears, they go away. But someone
Yeah.
who is putting that in the world, you see that they're still like, I'm still anxious, I'm still depressed, but
Mm.
I'm doing better. And I'm like, but you're not truly free. And that was something that I
Yeah.
started to recognize, where it's like, oh, I want to learn from this person. And then I'm like, oh, you were talking about crystals. Like, God,
Yeah.
I'm going to put that in God. I'm not going to keep going down that route. I'm going to go back to what the Bible says, because it's so easy to get caught in those things
Yes.
versus being like, for me and my household, we serve the Lord. And so I'm only going to go
Yes.
to what the Bible tells me to do. And it actually tells us to be very careful
Mm-hmm.
on what we put our faith and hope into. And I think
Yes.
sometimes we go, well, I just didn't pray enough. I just didn't pray enough. I'm like,
Hmm.
can I ask, when was the last time you rested? Because that is in this season. I'm like, ooh, ooh, that's what it is.
Yeah.
I haven't, which is why I think this week was such a bigger week for me mentally, was because it was like, let me sit in this and speak
Mm.
truth to it, because I'm
Yeah.
so good at pushing it off. And
Mm.
so this is where I love that you were just like, Sabbath, Sabbath, Sabbath. Like, figure it
Yeah.
out. If it's 2 hours, 4 hours, whatever you can start with. It's different seasons. So, when you have kids, maybe it's that space, like moms, I know this for all of us, is that 20, 30 minutes after they're all in bed is just being by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Do it. If it's getting up earlier in the morning, do it. Like, I'm just like, that's not for me. Like, I'm good. But for some moms, they're like, they thrive off that. And I'm like, do it. Like, whatever works in that time. If it's sitting in the car an extra 5 minutes, somebody told me something that I've held on to, is like, you could always find the reasons why you can't, but now
Mm.
you need to find the reasons that you need to and should.
Yeah.
So, calling somebody out, I don't know who that is, but yes. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just thank you for having me. And
Thank you for
well, I
being
guess I will
here.
add
Yeah.
this on my website. I do have like a 5-day devotional that I think might help some people
Oh,
listening.
fun.
It's one
Yeah.
of the days is all about Sabbath, exploring what that looks like. So that's just free on my website. It's called The
Yes.
Guide to Abide. You can check that out.
Ooh.
If for anyone who wants to maybe dive a little bit deeper. But again, I think
Yeah.
this isn't something we really have to overthink. We just have to try
Yeah.
it. Yeah.
Yes. So we'll have that linked, guys, below, so you guys can leave comments. You guys can reach out to Hannah. You can get her 5D devotional just to kind of see what that would look like for you, to kind of, because it is hard trying to figure out where to start, and it's one
Yeah.
thing. And that's the whole thing with captivating thoughts too, is that get one thing that you can say, I'm going to speak this thought is the one I'm going to captivate. This is the one I'm going to speak truth into, because that's probably the one that's repeating, is I can't do it. It's like, okay, but why should you? What is the one thing that you can do that would really help guide you to
Yeah.
that? And you guys can ask any question below. Thank you so much, Hannah, for joining us. This was such a great conversation, and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye.
Thanks.